So it's been a little while since I made a Photoshop tutorial, and I was just working on this image. I was touching it up and just removing some of the things that were in the way, this piece of eelgrass, and then there's actually a person behind the turtle. And I really like this image, but those things are a little bit distracting, so I just eliminated them and thought really improved the overall composition of the image, and I thought it would be a good tutorial. So we are going to start off by eliminating this piece of eelgrass. And there are a number of ways that you can do this inside of Photoshop. So I'm just going to quickly go through some of these with you. In the toolbar, if you go to the section that contains your healing brush, patch tool, etc., these three top tools could be helpful in a situation like this. So the patch tool is probably going to be one of the easiest. You can simply just grab the patch tool and kind of draw a real rough selection around the thing that you want to get rid of. And then you just click, hold, and drag to an area on the image that you want to sample from, and you let go, and Photoshop just kind of magically makes it all, disappear, and it actually looks really good with just like a one-click situation. So that one actually is probably a good one to do here. But just to talk about some of the other ones real quickly, if you wanted to use the healing brush tool, the healing brush tool works a little bit differently. You will Option or Alt click in an area to sample, and then you go to the area you want to get rid of, and you just kind of start painting over it. And I think the trick when you're using this sort of tool is you kind of got to sample often, right? And sample from different sides and kind of you poke at it. The brush itself needs to maybe not be quite like, I don't like to work with a completely hard brush or a completely soft brush, so I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. And then the size of the brush, you can just easily adjust that by clicking your right and left bracket keys, and that will allow you to increase or decrease your brush size. Child? What? Wait, what?
Cal Poly.
You got into Cal Poly? What? Pumpkin! You got into slow?
I know, what?
What? Oh my God, I'm coming down right now. I'm gonna just undo this and get back. And what we're gonna do next is we're just gonna look at the spot healing brush tool. With the spot healing brush tool, all you have to do is just swipe over the element that you want to get rid of, and then Photoshop just kind of does its magic and it just eliminates it. So this one is a lot easier to use, and it does a pretty darn good job. You can just kind of swipe a few times and eliminate it. So those are the three tools that you have available right here: patch, healing brush, and spot healing brush. And depending on what you're doing, you just kind of have to give them a try. The other tool that you can use to eliminate elements is your clone stamp tool. And the clone stamp tool, I'll zoom in so we can get a good look at what we want to eliminate right here. So let's switch back to the clone stamp. And with the clone stamp tool, I'm going to come into my brush right here and I'll increase the hardness a little bit. I don't want it to be too soft and fuzzy because I'm going to be working next to the turtle head. So I'll maybe up that to like 75, 80%. And then I'm going to reduce the brush size by using the left bracket key. So to use this tool, you need to hold on your Option key to take a sample, and then you simply will click, hold, and drag. And it's basically copying from that area. I also have my opacity set to 80%. So right now I'm going to up that to 100%. And we'll go ahead and just continue to cover up or wipe this out. The trick to using this is to sample often. Don't just like click once and then start swiping, because everything will look kind of pixelated and it starts to look a little digital. On something like this, it can be a little tough when you get close to the edge, because if I sample, I need to be real careful at the edge, and sometimes you just don't always get accurate settings. So what I actually prefer to do, I'm just going to undo a few times here, is I prefer in this situation anyways, prior to doing my clone stamping, to making a selection so I can isolate and protect the turtle. So to make the selection, I'm going to use the object selection tool right here, And with that tool, I'm just going to draw a selection around the turtle body like so. And I'm not going to worry about the reflection because I'm not going to be working up there. Remember, I only need to remove the turtle. So that immediately does a pretty darn good job at selecting the turtle. But you can see like underneath the neck right here and right here at the start of its shell on the top, it didn't do a perfect job. So I'll need to touch that up. And we do have the quick selection and the magic wand tool. So if you wanted to use either of those, you could select those tools. And in this case, I need to subtract from the selection. So to subtract, we would hold down our Option or Alt key, and then you can just kind of come in here with this quick selection tool anyways, and just kind of swipe over the areas that you want to eliminate. And again, we're going to be holding down the Option or Alt key. Now, the problem with this particular image is it kind of cuts into the neck area, and that's because this area is very close in color value to what it is that we're working with. So you probably won't be able to complete your selection with this alone. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually use quick selection mode. You can access that by clicking this little icon down here, which allows you to edit in quick selection mode, or use the keyboard shortcut of Q. And when you get in quick selection mode, you're going to get this red overlay that appears over the image. So the area that isn't red is part of my selection, and everything that is red is not part of the selection. And I'll just zoom back in a little bit. And what we're going to do here is we're going to use our brush tool. And when we use black and white, we can either add to or subtract from the selection. So if we use white, that's going to be adding to the selection. So you can see that looks like I'm painting away the red. I'm actually painting into my selection. And if I use black, I'll use the keyboard shortcut of X to flip-flop my foreground and background color. And if I use black as my foreground color, I can paint away. So this is going to be subtracting from my selection. So I'll come over here. I'm going to use my bracket keys to get my brush to be a little bit smaller. And I'm just going to kind of paint away the area that I do not want to be part of the selection. And if you end up making a mistake, you just use your X key and you flip these around, and you can go about refining the selection until you have it just how you want it to be. But the area that we're mostly concerned about is right in here, where we have this section that we want to go ahead and mask out or remove from our image, and then the area up here. The rest of the turtle, it doesn't really matter about the selection because we're not doing anything else with it at this point. So once you've refined that, you're going to go ahead and you're going to get out of quick selection mode. We do that by clicking Q or hitting this icon in the toolbar. And now you can see I have a more refined selection of my turtle. Now, what I want to do is I want to save this so I can store it, because at some point I might drop the selection. I just want to make sure if I've taken some time to create the selection that I save it in some way. So you could either just do like a copy paste, which is going to make a new layer, and then we'll have just the turtle on its own layer right here. So if I hide everything else, there's my turtle, and I could just kind of hide that layer and store it as a selection. Or if you have the selection loaded, if you go to the channel panel, you can actually save a selection in the channel panel, and it just saves it as black and white information. So this is really useful. I'm going to click this little icon, which saves the selection as a channel. And when I do that, you can see that it saves a kind of black and white version of my turtle. So the white part is the selection, the black part is not part of the selection. And when I turn this layer on, I get that red overlay. So you could actually edit the selection at this point as well in order to further refine it. But we don't actually want to do any of those things. And let's just say that my selection was no longer selected. If I want to load it, I can just Command or Control click, and it'll load that and store it as a selection. So that's real handy. It doesn't take up hardly any file size because it's just black and white information that gets stored with your document. We'll go into the layers, and I'm going to work back on my original layer. Well, what was my original layer? And we're going to remove the person here. So I'll zoom into this area, and I'm going to use my clone stamp. And now when I use my clone stamp, once I take my sample, and at this point, I'll probably make sure that my brush has a little bit softer of an edge. Once I take my sample over here by holding down the Option or Alt key, I can just kind of liberally paint, except that nothing is happening. And that's because right now my turtle is selected. I actually want everything else selected. So with this selection active, I'm going to use select inverse, and that will select everything else. So now everything except for the turtle is selected. For instance, if I got my paintbrush and I just drew across my document, you can see how the turtle is not affected by that line. It does not affect the turtle, and that's because the turtle is not part of our selection. So going back to my clone stamp, I'll zoom in. I'm going to hold in my Option key to take a sample, and now I can just kind of paint. And if I go into the body of the turtle, it doesn't really matter. Like, I'm not going to paint in there because it's not part of my selection. So this is a great way to be able to fix this up, in that you're not going to be detrimentally affecting something that you might not want to affect. I'll make my brush a little smaller, and I'm just going to kind of like Option drag. Now, when I dragged over here, I got a little bit of the shell, and that's because as I take my sample, if I Option click right here and take my sample and I swipe across, see that little crosshair? That's where the sample is coming from. So as I paint, that's where it's picking up the information from. So when you do this, you're going to want to make sure that you know, like if I sample over here and I start swiping in, at some point I might reach the shell, and then I'm going to be painting with the shell. So I'll want to be careful to not do that. So if I Option click and I come in here and I start to paint, I might need to like reset this and like Option click again and come in here and start to kind of paint in to cover up this area. And I'm going to get a bigger brush. My brush is still this soft brush. We'll zoom out a little bit, and I'm just going to kind of take a sample. And actually, before I do that, let's lower the opacity. And sometimes I like to actually work in luminosity for my blending mode, because this just helps the colors to kind of blend a little bit better. It'll give you more realistic type of look. So you can kind of come in here and just kind of do that. If you make a mistake, just edit undo or Command or Control Z, and then, you know, sample again and just try to kind of come back in there and do some of the painting. So that looks pretty good. I'm going to switch back to normal mode just because the luminosity gave me a little bit of a, not so much of a teal color, which I want to kind of pick up. So I'll just kind of come back in normal mode and maybe overwrite some of those. The opacity is a little high, so let's drop that down. And then we can Option click and come over here and just kind of cover up some of those little nuances, those things that I didn't really like. And that looks pretty good. So if I zoom back out, there it is. All of our stuff that we didn't want is now eliminated. And now my file looks great. It's as if those things never existed. So as you can see, I've showed you a couple of different methods of removing items in a document. This is a great way to be able to touch something up. I had taken a pretty decent picture of a turtle, but now I've really stepped this up, so it's really a great composition. I don't have any of those distracting elements that were definitely interfering with my final product. So I hope you found this helpful and that you'll be able to utilize this while you use Photoshop.